Hello students, welcome back. We completed section 1 introduction except for one topic. This one here, type 1 error versus type 2 error. And this one I regard it as an optional topic because there is a way to get away with this without really going through the details of it. And students who took that path traditionally did a lot better than students went through this. But apparently our textbook authors disagree, and our textbook are written in terms of this way. And I warned you before, my students who went through the other way traditionally performed better. Nonetheless, let's talk about this. So classification of errors in hypothesis testing. There are two types of errors here. Type 1 error is error from rejecting the null hypothesis even though it is right. And type 2 error is the error from rejecting the alternative hypothesis even though it is right. Is there any other type of error? No, there isn't. You see, there are only two hypotheses, H0 and HA. One of them must be right, and then one of them I have accept, and the other one I have to reject. So, case 1, I don't want to get confused with 1 and 2. So case A, oh, that's also terrible. I don't want to get confused with this HA. Oh, come on. All right. The first case, if H0 is right, and then the second case, HA is right. Is there any other case? No, okay. When H0 is right, then if I call H0, then there's no error. That's correct. Now, if H0 is right, yet I rejected it, and that's one possible error, which I call the type 1 error. Make sense? Now, how about the other case, the second case? We considered everything related to the first case where H0 is correct. Now let's consider the other case where HA is right. So the second case, when HA is right, and if I called HA, if I accepted HA, then no error there. I did it right. But even though HA is right, I reject the alternative hypothesis. Then that's an error, and that's what I call type 2 error. Type 1 error comes from case 1, where H0 is right, but I rejected it. And the other case, H0 is right, and I called it, then that's good, no error. Type 2 error comes from the second case. Alternative is right, but I rejected it. If I accepted HA, then that's not an error. So, out of 4 possibilities, 2 are correct, no error, and 2 are errors, and those are type 1 error and type 2 error. Now, ideally, I'd like to minimize both of the probabilities. But in reality, that's a very difficult thing to do, often impossible thing to do. So we have to prioritize accordingly, and we prioritize type 1 error first. So we say the level of significance alpha is the maximum bound of the type 1 error. Maximum probability of type 1 error, that is, the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis even though it is right. So it's actually a conditional probability. Even though H0 is right, I'm rejecting it. So in short, H0 is right. So in criminal justice system, the defendant is innocent. But even though the defendant is innocent, that's thrown away and accept the alternative guilty verdict. That's basically type 1 error. Okay, delivering a guilty verdict to an innocent person. That is type 1 error. And that's bad, isn't it? That's really bad. Now let's go to type 2 error. HA is rejected even though it is right. Again, this is a conditional probability. Even though alternative is right, we reject it. So back in criminal justice system again, HA is right. That means the defendant is guilty, but due to lack of evidence, he walks free. Reject it, and then go to default. Go to presumed innocence. That's bad too, isn't it? But still, compare with this. Delivering a guilty verdict to innocent person versus guilty person walks away due to lack of evidence, which is something we really want to control. This one. We want to minimize this one as much as possible and then think about this one later as an afterthought. Does it make sense? That's what we're going to do. We're going to control alpha as much as we can. So we're going to take this probability, the maximum bound of this type 1 error, as something like 0.01, 1%, or 0.05, 5%, etc. And say 0.1, 0.05, 0.01, etc. But I've never seen 0.1, 10%. 0.05 is the smallest I've ever seen. And those are generally coming from social science examples. And then for anything from natural science, I've seen something larger, 0.01 either, 1% either. I see something like 0.0001% or something, if you do some scientific measurement in natural science. In behavioral science, there are more errors, so a little bit more tolerant to errors. How do we visualize that? One way to visualize is through something like this. Let's go back to the previous example problem about paint drying time. So alpha is 0.02, so 2%, and that's the red area. So assuming the null is right, so 75, okay, that is right, assuming null is right. So based upon 75, that's the expected value. And if you do sample study, by some strange luck, you may get some really large value or maybe really small value. Just by pure luck, getting some value less than this threshold should be 2%. So even though null is right, there's only 2% chance here. So if that falls, then I'll take that 2% risk and then deliver HA. I'll go alternative. In this particular case, no. That's a threshold, but observed sample mean was 72.3. It fell in blue region, right? That's 2% here. And that's close enough to the null. So close to null, then I go with null. It's easy to see graphically. Now let me change this alpha value to something greater, 0.05. So let me take 5% of level of significance. So now red area has 5%. There's 5% of chance that the sample mean fell into this red region simply by luck, or bad luck, or maybe exceptional good luck. And pretty close, but still 72.3 fell into the blue region, so close to null, so we accept null. As I said, alpha greater than 0.05, I've never seen that, but just for an argument's sake, let's go 8%. Now, close, but 72.3 went to the red region. So too far away from the null. So I reject the null and accept alternative hypothesis because the observed mean fell into the alternative region. But in this case, in this setting, I'm accepting 8% of significance level. That is, there's about 8% of chance that I make type 1 error. That is, even though null is right, I'm accepting it. I'm rejecting it, excuse me, and thus committing type 1 error. And that should be low, but in this particular case, I accept it as much as 8%, which is typically bad. Let's go back to where it used to be. Let's go to that baby problem. Here I use 5%, and there's 5% of chance that I end up with sample mean of 2,984 or higher, assuming the null is right. Null is 2,800, see? And then anything further than that, I'll accept that 5% of chance of making type 1 error, and then just go with alternative. And based upon that, 3060 is far away from the null, so I reject the null hypothesis because it's far away. Now, what if I change this alpha value into something smaller, like 2%? Okay, now the red region has only 2%, and what do I get? 3029 and 3030 or so. That's the threshold now, and there's about 2% of chance that I end up with a sample mean of 3030 or higher, simply out of luck, assuming null is right, still 2,800. And even with 2% of chance of making type 1 error, I got 360 in the red region, so too far away from the null, so I reject it and go to alternative hypothesis. What if I change to 1%? It's too close. So close that I don't want to consider that. Okay, let me go to alpha value 0.005, so 0.5% chance. If I do that, then alpha value is very, very small. So I made really strong commitment not making type 1 error. So even if there is, I'm going to go take the risk only about 0.5%. Otherwise, I'll just go with null, and not surprisingly, 360 is in blue region, close enough to null, so I go with null. That's because alpha changed. So the tolerance for type 1 error became this small, so just about everything is moving toward null. Only for a very exceptional case is going over to alternative. In that case, we get something like this. Let's go back to about 2%. And if I accept 2% of the maximum type 1 error, under that assumption, then 360 is still too far away from the null, and I reject it and accept the alternative. So alpha value is creating this red area, and from that we get a threshold value, critical value, and compare the critical value with the sample mean, and you can draw a conclusion graphically. That's basically what we are up to in the next section, section 2.